I think that brings up an interesting topic, Wanda, because Wanda's pretty fascinating to me because I don't really what little I do know about her, I don't really understand her. She's not a likable character. And so, could you just give me a brief rundown of Wanda? Was she popular? What's her history? I would find that interesting.
Okay, so Wanda, the earliest that I remember on Wanda and Pietro were members of Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, which appeared really early on in X-Men. In fact, Doc, if you want to, while you're on the computer, if you want to look up and see when they first appeared, when the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants first appeared. But it's an early X-Men issue from back in the 60s, because Magneto's like one of their first villains. And his Brotherhood is like Wanda, the Scarlet Witch, Pietro, which is Quicksilver, the Toad, and I think it might be the Blob, and there might be one or two other characters. Wait, it was Mastermind. Mastermind was another member of that group. So there was like 4 or 5 of them that ran around with Magneto for a little while. Well, that was just the way it was for a little while.
It was the X-Men number 4, March 1964.
X-Men number 4.
Wow, so she's early then. That's interesting.
She's been in there a long time.
Because real quick, from an outsider's perspective, because you've been immersed in a world that I have not been immersed in, just looking at it, she seems like she's just the character they added in because they couldn't use the X-Men and they couldn't use Spider-Man early on. But anyway, go ahead.
So the thing was that, except for some villain appearances in the X-Men books, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are not mainstay villains or mainstay characters in the mutant books at all. They're hardly ever in those books.
Scarlet Witch mostly, more with the Avengers mostly.
Yeah, so early on, they ended up transitioning over to the Avengers titles. And they both were members of the Avengers early on. And what the interesting part about the Avengers, early Avengers, with the exception of the original members like Cap, Wasp, Giant Man, Goliath, whatever you want to call Hank Pym at that point, Iron Man, Hulk, and Thor, aside from that crew, a lot of the newer other characters that joined over the first 100 issues, a solid portion of them were villains that rehabilitated and joined the Avengers. Hawkeye, Clint Barton, he was a villain. Wonder Man, Simon Williams, he was the Grim Reaper's partner and brother. He was a villain.
The Vision?
The Vision was actually
technically a villain, but
the Vision was originally the Human Torch from the group The Invaders. He was an android in World War II, and then was pulled out of storage by Ultron. After Hank Pym created Ultron to try to be a helper with the group, and Ultron turned against the group, Ultron took the old Human Torch body and made the Vision and was going to use him to fight the Avengers.
But he wasn't the Vision until Ultron made him the Vision.
Correct.
The way you said that, the Human Torch was the Vision.
He took the Human Torch android and created the Vision.
I think that's way more interesting than the way that they did it.
And then he even did another one. He created another robot named Joe Costa, a female wife for himself that also was a bad guy.
It was based on the Wasp.
Right. And then both Joe Costa and Vision both end up becoming members of the Avengers. And as everybody knows, Vision ends up being like this super powerful, well-anchored member, like a pillar in their group for many years. So there's a cast of villains that have switched sides.
So, to me, Wanda she makes more sense as a villain because the way they wrote her in the WandaVision, which I couldn't even bear to watch. Was that the name of the film?
It was WandaVision. WandaVision, a TV show.
And then later on in the Doctor Strange movie, there's no redeeming qualities about her. I mean, you could see that, her struggle from when her parents were killed and her brother died. She was somewhat likable. You could kind of relate to her. But it seems to me that Marvel's having difficulty writing characters that are relatable and that you can have empathy for even whenever they make terrible choices.
But I don't think in the comics Wanda was very relatable either. And there's a lot of, at least in the way they did write, they wrote her in the stories with a lot of situations where people were looking at her like, I don't know, what's your deal? And they didn't really like her. And like after the whole House of M, she was hated by all the mutants for all this. And she was hated by a lot of people. And most people really, so her character has always been treated that way, that people weren't really, they didn't really like her.
So the another thing about Wanda and Quicksilver, like I said, they became Avengers, and Wanda was one of those characters that most of the people early on wrote her a certain way. And it wasn't until later where her powers really started going like into another level, and when they started really getting the whole idea of what it really meant to be able to manipulate reality, because she had this kind of chaos manipulation of reality power that she really didn't have control of for the early parts of the story time. And it's now, as they've done it, like I'll like in the Avengers movie where they're dealing with in Sokovia, and they're fighting against Hydra and all this stuff, and Scarlet Witch and Vision, or Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, are actually, they start off against the Avengers, and when they realize that he's about to murder a whole city in Sokovia by dropping that thing and killing all his people, the big part of the city that raised up in the air, that's kind of when they decided, all right, we might be fighting for the wrong side here. And that's kind of how it went in the comics, where they kind of realized, we're kind of not totally on the same page with Magneto, so we're going to do something to kind of counter it. So, and as in the group with the Avengers, it gave the characters, you had this large team and they're fighting in those comics. They integrated pretty well into that book. So, and in the 80s, when they really had her and Vision team like really coupled up, there was all these different story arcs. They had a miniseries, 2 miniseries, and a Vision series, and there's a lot of different things that went on, and they did some interesting things with the character, but not so much that you were like, oh wow, Scarlet Witch is the best. But one thing they never really did, they never really turned her into the villain. And in your regards about the Doctor Strange movie, the recent one, the Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness thing, Doctor Strange is like, I love Doctor Strange. It's one of the characters.
Pretty cool character. I just don't understand
really
why is it that Doctor Strange becomes somewhat of the focal point in the Spider-Man film, and what's her name Wanda becomes somewhat of the focal point in this other girl, and it's like, let these people have their own films.
I just didn't understand why they decided Wanda was going to be the bad guy. That made no sense to me, especially when you were about to do a Kang storyline that Wanda and Vision in the comics tied heavily in on.
So they're going to try to redeem her somehow? I mean, after all the stuff that she's done, how can you...
No, there's no redeeming her. They killed her. In that Doctor Strange movie, they killed her.
They say that, in Marvel and Star Wars, no one's ever truly dead.
Well, unless they bring her in from a different...
But that's the name of the game, alternate universes.
Right. So right now, if you look at what they're talking about, the down the road on the Marvel phases, when they get to the Secret Wars and the Eternity War, those 2 Avengers movies, that storyline, the new Secret Wars, not the original Secret Wars, but the new Secret Wars, was the multiverse being destroyed and everything breaking down into one other place. That was all the other multiverse outside of the primary universe was subsiding. So you had these different characters there, and it was like battle world, and all these characters went to war. So they can bring Chris Evans Captain America back. They can bring that Wanda back.
Yeah,
they could bring
Chris Evans
they could bring the Scarlett Johansson Black Widow back. They can bring all these characters back and put them in this place, and they think those 2 movies, the speculation is they're gonna go to town and bring all these characters back for a big 2-movie deal with some massive deal, and they pushed it back an extra year or 2 to set this, and then Iger wants to set the stories and do the same kind of like story drop.
Who knows if they'll ever get made, man, with all this stuff with Indiana Jones.
But in the end, it's all about money. But I really think that and this might be a little of a hot take, but I do think that people really just need to learn to kind of move on from the MCU, because it's not comics.
Right.
Actors get older, and it's like even then, taking away, like if you mentioned Indiana Jones, taking away all the writing aspects and all of that, the character is like 80 years old. Like he's just not, and we're kind of squeezing as much as we can, but it's just like, so there's going to be a day, when Chris Evans is going to be like, if we're 70 years old, we're going to have him try to play Captain America. I mean, there's storylines that can follow, but even then,
Well, I mean, you've
eventually
already-
you got to learn to move on.
Yeah,
And
but-
that's what I think the point is.
And I agree. And it took me a minute when all these Marvel movies are coming out to really just sit back and enjoy them. Enjoy them for I'm getting to watch comic books that I grew up with that for the vast majority of my life you could never make in a movie and make them look as cool as they look now. And yeah, they don't follow the comics exactly, but man, they've been pretty awesome.
So,
Close.
Doc, why don't you wrap it up and give us some of your thoughts about Wanda, what you think the overall picture could be, or what you think
Me?
about her character
Well,
overall?
I think that it wouldn't be surprised. Like I said, we talked in one of the other videos that there's people assuming and leaking that she might be in this Deadpool movie or whatever. And there are certain precedents because we know there's versions and there's the whole alternate universe. So I wouldn't be surprised if they brought her back. But overall, I don't think when you really read the comics, her arc and the way she's portrayed is massively different from the way she is in the comics. She's in the comics. There's not a lot of people. There's a lot of people in the universe that have issues with her, and her portrayal in the universe is kind of the same. And a lot of people are really into her.